A park ranger stands forward-facing in uniform of a tan flat hat, gray shirt, and green trousers. The ranger stands on a sidewalk, and behind the ranger is a rock-faced brick wall with steps leading upward. Above the ranger's right shoulder is a cast iron plaque. Hello. My name is Will Wilson. I'm one of the park rangers at Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park. And today we will be talking a little bit about the siege of Chattanooga that, of course, the Confederate Army of Tennessee will have placed on the Union Army of the Cumberland as the Union Army is bottled up within that 1 square mile of Chattanooga. And we, of course, as you can see, are not anywhere inside the National Military Park, but yet we are here in Chattanooga in what is Fort Wood Historic District. And we are standing here at what would have been the southwest angle of Fort Wood, the east salient of the outer works, if you will. You can see Fort Wood in this map. This map is Defenses of Chattanooga, Tennessee. This map will show you the Tennessee River at the top of the map as it makes its way to the left and then turns down or turns to the south. Within that border of the southern bank and the east bank of the river is the city of Chattanooga itself, marked by the lines that are in this grid formation. You can then see this blue line, this crescent shape of a blue line to the east of the city as it is anchored on the Tennessee River. Southern bank makes it that crescent shape to the Tennessee River's eastern bank. Fort Wood, of course, is not pictured within that actual line of defenses. Fort Wood stands alone in this map. You can see it here just to the east of that line a little ways. And also here in this sketch you can actually see what Fort Wood would have looked like in the shape of a square, with the corners of each square open into a diamond shape. Now Fort Wood, of course, is going to play a significant role in the Union defense of Chattanooga, and with that, what we will be doing is going to another location that would have been within Fort Wood itself. Fort Wood literally taking up almost an entire what is now a city square block, and we're going to listen to hear a story from a private in Battery C of the 1st Wisconsin Heavy Artillery. So with that, why don't you come along and we'll hear that story next. The park ranger now stands forward facing and stands next to a black cast iron cannon mounted on a 2-wheeled carriage next to some shrubs. Behind the ranger is a street, and across the street is a house. And so you can see we have again changed our location. We are, though, still in what would have been Fort Wood, here in the historic Fort Wood district. We are next to, of course, one of the park's commemorative features, this 30-pound Parrott rifle, which Battery C of the 1st Wisconsin Heavy Artillery would have actually had in place here inside of Fort Wood. This cannon certainly having the range to fire towards the Confederate lines on Missionary Ridge off to our east. But what we will be speaking about here is actually the humanity that many of these soldiers are going to encounter while they are positioned here in Fort Wood. This account comes in the Confederate Veteran in 1920, and it is from Private Chauncey Baker, who will speak to an incident that happened during the siege. Of course, it will really affect himself, along with the captain of the Battery C, John Davies, and really the entire regiment itself is going to find some empathy and some compassion within this story. And many of you, much like myself, are parents, and we can also attest to the same type of incident happening, and hopefully we can all take something away from it. So let's listen to that story. A few days ago, in the town where I live, Weatherford, Texas, North Main Street was crowded with traffic. Trucks, cars, wagons, and vehicles of every kind and description passing in every direction. A little child, a sweet little blue-eyed, curly-haired girl, had escaped her mother's watchful eyes as she was shopping in one of the stores and had wandered out onto the street. She was unafraid, innocent, sweet, and was enjoying the sights and sounds about her as she watched the cars passing by. One large touring car came toward her, and the driver, seeing the danger, was afraid to try and pass around her, fearing she might run out in front of the car. He stopped his car and pleasantly spoke to the child, telling her to move out of the way. She obeyed and stood wonderingly watching the car go by. By this time, several others had observed the child, and realizing that if she was seen, there was no danger of running over her. They rather enjoyed the novel spectacle of a little child blocking the traffic of the busy street. In the meantime, the little girl was taking in the sights as unconscious of danger as if though she were at home. By this time, traffic had stopped, and the innocent cause of this congestion was standing in the middle of the street, smiling and unafraid. But the mother, having missed the child and discovering her whereabouts, rushed frantically out into the street and gathered the child in her arms, scarce realizing the baby's innocence and sweetness were her greatest protection. And then my mind went back to the dark days of 1863, when I witnessed a scene somewhat similar to the one just enacted before my eyes. Two armies, the Confederate and the Union, were facing each other upon the eve of battle. The Confederate Army was aligned on Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge, while the Union Army was entrenched in the valley below. Both were preparing for the death struggle awaiting them. The armies were pretty near to each other, and both had pickets out, watching every movement of the enemy. One day, we were perfectly astonished by the sight of a little child toddling toward our lines. She was such a little, innocent, unafraid creature, entirely unconscious of any danger. She came from the direction of the rebel army, and needless to say, we surrendered to her with the firing of a gun. When she reached a place within our lines, hundreds of our men gathered around her. Apparently, she was perfectly at home as she stood looking at us with wide open eyes in which shone perfect trust and confidence. The boys began to ply her with questions as to what her name was and where she came from, but she could not give a satisfactory answer. One of the men asked her to whom she belonged, and she lisped, "Uncle Jim." Then we asked her who Uncle Jim was, and she pointed toward the Confederate lines, by which we knew that she must have strayed away from Uncle Jim, and in some mysterious manner made her way through both picket lines into the Yankee Army. Every man wanted to take her and kiss her, and how they did wish they had some candy or cakes to give her. but army rations afforded nothing of this kind. Then some of the men thought of sugar, and each wanted to give her some, of which they had a plentiful supply. So we loaded her down with big lumps of the sweet stuff. And one boy happened to remember that he had a string of beads, which he bought and placed around her neck. Another had a silk handkerchief, which he tied about her throat, while the other boys, not to be outdone, searched amongst their keepsakes, which their sisters and sweethearts had sent them, and found handkerchiefs and ribbons, which they tied on her small person. One produced a rosette of red, white, and blue ribbon, which he pinned on her dress. Another found a small silk flag, and that also was pinned onto her, all of which she enjoyed immensely and seemed to think it was all in the play. I saw tears come into eyes that had not been wet since they had left their mothers, wives, and sweethearts in the faraway north. Our captain took the child in his arms, and while he pressed her close to his heart, said, "Boys, I've got a little girl at home about the age of this little one. Oh God, I wonder if I shall ever see her again." At this, every man removed his hat and stood silently at attention. But if you had asked them why they did so, they could not have told you. But I know now, a little child can bring God mighty near you under such conditions. And then the question was raised, what shall we do with her? For obviously, we could not keep the child in such circumstances of impending danger. The problem was solved by one of the men, removing the ramrod from his gun and tying a white handkerchief upon the end. Then, after obtaining permission from the captain, he took the child and her gifts in his arms and started towards the rebel lines. Bob Chambers, one of the biggest devils in our company, called to him to hold on a minute. He wanted to send Uncle Jim some coffee. "I'll bet he hasn't had a good cup of coffee since the war began," he said. So we filled a small bag with the precious grains and gave it to the little girl, saying, "Take this to your Uncle Jim." The boys all shouted a goodbye as they started for the rebel lines, the little girl still holding high the flag of truce. As they neared the Confederate line, several men came forward to meet them, among whom was Uncle Jim, who was searching for his little girl in every direction. Ed Avery, who was carrying the child, learned from Uncle Jim that the child's father had been killed at the Battle of Chickamauga, and that her mother had since passed, leaving the child to the care of Uncle Jim, who was waiting for a chance to send her to his home in the Southland. Tightly holding the baby in his arms and looking fondly at her, Uncle Jim said, "Boys, I'm going to get permission to take her to my home, and maybe while I'm gone, this battle will come off. My hope is that it will, for damned if I feel like shooting at you fellas after this. At least for some time to come." With a twinkle in his eyes and a smile upon his weathered features, as the gray-clad men around him grasped his meaning, a regular rebel yell went up from each throat, which was echoed from the blue-clad lines as they witnessed the dramatic scene and both sounds blended into silent echoes from the rugged sides of Missionary Ridge. And so, with that story, again, as it brings us into a realization that these men still have these powerful feelings, that humanity can still reach each and every one of them, even in some of the darkest days of the war, where many of the Union soldiers have been bottled up here in Chattanooga for so long, rationing. The rations have been being cut, and then of course Confederate soldiers as well on those ridges, Missionary Ridge and Lookout Mountain, having again to endure the weather of November in 1863. We hope that this is a testament that you too can take with you in our everyday lives, that regardless of our situation, we can still find those elements of humanity that can all bring us again together. So we hope that you enjoyed this program. We hope that you have an opportunity to continue to watch the programs that we will be conducting to commemorate the 157th anniversary of the battles for Chattanooga.